Chapter 8. Thursday late morning. It took a few minutes to round up the animals. Muggs was well-mannered until he heard the leash rattle. Then he barked all over the place, chasing Goliath, who appeared to take deep offense and cornered Muggs in the kitchen, swatting at him twice. Trying to separate the two was not fun. Finally, she got them all calmed down with a treat or two, and had another pocketful of treats handy. With Thaddeus on her shoulder, she opened the kitchen door, and all four of them headed out to Nan's place via the creek. There was just no other path for her. Any chance she had, she chose to walk by the water. Besides, she wanted to avoid her front yard and anybody wanting to talk to her. So many things had changed since she had moved here. The animals were just one part of it. She used to deal well with people, mostly because she had a polished, glossy tone, not giving offense, not taking offense, kinda like being dead inside. And now here she did everything she could to avoid people, at least certain people. She was happy to see the sun shining. She loved the way the long shadows of the sun's arms touched on the green leaves as they gently waved in the wind. This was a nice thing about her house being on the creek. It was in a bit of a valley, and the wind whistled down with such gentleness that it always made her smile. Listening to the water, listening to the wind and the birds, it was incredibly peaceful. She wasn't sure when, if ever, in all of her marriage, she'd had an opportunity to enjoy Mother Nature as much as she did here. And who knew it was something she would fall in love with, without actual gardening involved. Here she could listen to the birds for hours, just sitting beside the creek, dipping her toes in the icy water, even though she knew what had come out of it in the last couple weeks. The creek remained special. It made her feel connected. She was thoroughly jealous of all those people who lived in the countryside. Not that she wanted to milk cows or to raise chickens for their eggs or anything, but she yearned to have some real space to wander without being hemmed in by houses or people. Yet what she had here was a great first step in that direction. She loved to dip her fingers in the creek, to feel that connection, that sense of peace, that oneness. How fanciful of her. Still, if she had learned one thing with all the recent chaos, it was that life was short, too short. What she really needed to do was find a way to make the most of what time she did have. She'd lost so much with her pending divorce, and yet she'd already gained so much more. If she'd had any idea a life like this existed for her outside of her marriage, she'd have left a long time ago. Of course, she hadn't really left of her own choice. She'd been replaced. She'd fought it kicking and screaming. That had been because of fear. Fear of what was happening, fear of what would happen to her afterward, fear of where she'd live, fear of the future. Those thoughts were so bad, so detrimental to her. Because of how absolutely stunningly wonderful her future was, even this early version of it. Smiling, she opened her arms wide and did a jig, dancing and twirling on the path. "I know, Muggs. I'm acting crazy," she stated gaily. "But life is good. How can anybody not appreciate this?" Muggs barked, jumping around with her. She chuckled and resumed walking, her footsteps light, her heart even lighter. "Let's go visit Nan," she said. "Unlike us, she hasn't had a good day." In fact, her grandmother worried Doreen. Nan alternated between being all there in mind and in body, and not even close. Now that Doreen finally had Nan back in her life again, Doreen didn't want to lose her grandmother. She'd do anything to give that special woman another 20 years on Earth with her. As it was hard to know how to help her. Nan had friends and a busy life. She seemed to enjoy her current lifestyle too. Doreen had the photocopy of the letter she had taken from underneath the bed. She wasn't sure if that would add to Nan's despondency, or if it would make her feel better. Doreen wanted it to make her grandmother feel better, obviously. She was bringing back a lot of powerful memories. She didn't want to upset Nan any more than she had to. She was the sweetest old lady. Okay, so she had this gambling habit. But it really wasn't so much her gambling right now. It was Nan getting other people to gamble. At that, she laughed out loud. Nan, you keep Mac hopping. That can't be a bad thing. She went around the corner, watching the traffic as they crossed the road. They weren't very far from the old folks' home. As she approached, she saw the gardener standing out front, talking to somebody. As soon as he saw her, he put his hands on his hips and pointed his finger at her. She stopped and asked, "And what is it you want me to do?" "I can't take the animals in the building. So if I don't cut across the lawn, how do I get to Nan's place?" "You come without the animals." His voice was gruff. "It's bad enough you walk on the grass, but now you get all the animals on it too." He crossed his arms, not budging an inch. Not to be deterred, Doreen walked around the corner to where Nan sat with her teapot on a little bistro set. When she looked up and caught sight of Doreen, Nan waved gaily. "Oh, there you are," she said. Doreen nodded, pointing at the gardener. "He won't let me cross the lawn." "Of course he will," Nan said. And then she held up her finger. "Oh right. I forgot all about those." Curious as to what she was up to, Doreen watched as Nan bent, then stood, holding something heavy in her hand. At least it looked heavy, because her grandmother's arms were straining. She watched her grandmother study the patio, then the grass leading to the sidewalk, then very carefully placed one stepping stone on the grass. Then she repeated this until 5 were in the grass, leading from the sidewalk to her patio. The gardener roared and raced toward her. But it was too late. Doreen skipped easily from one to the other, until she was in Nan's little garden. Muggs and Goliath walked on the grass. The cat stopped short of the patio, lay down and twitched his tail. "That's perfect." Doreen leaned down to give Nan a hug. "That's perfect." "That's perfect," Thaddeus said. But the gardener was having nothing to do with it, picking up one of the stepping stones. Nan stopped him, crying out, "Leave those there. You won't let her cross that lawn because it'll hurt your grass. So now we fixed it. Put that back." "I can't," he roared. Thaddeus squawked loudly. "The lawnmower will get caught on them every time." "So dig them into the lawn," Doreen said. "Just take a cutting knife, draw into the sod all the way around each of the stones, lift up the sod and place the stones down." She gave him a shrug. "That's hardly a big deal for a gardener." He glared at her. "We'll see about that," he snapped. He picked up the first stepping stone and carried it inside the old folks' home. Nan sighed and sat down, reaching out to calm Thaddeus, whose feathers were ruffled from the raised voices. "Now he'll complain to the manager." "And what's the manager likely to do?" Doreen asked curiously. "It depends if it's a good day or a bad day," Nan said with a smirk. "If he had fun with his girlfriend the night before, I'd probably get away with it. But if they're fighting, as they usually are, then he'll get mad." Doreen shook her head, sat down on the bistro chair and smiled at her grandmother. "You look like you've had a tough day today, Nan." Nan nodded. "I did. I had a bit of a tiff with an old friend." She gave Doreen a wide smile. "We'll get over it. We always do. But it's a reminder that life is short, and for those of us who have been around for a long time, we should know better, but we're still human," she said sadly. "I'm so sorry." Doreen reached across the table and squeezed her grandmother's hand gently. Her translucent skin worried Doreen. "Are you eating enough?" she asked. "Have you had lunch?" Nan gave her a lusty laugh. "I definitely am eating and had lunch. More to the point, are you eating? Did you have lunch already?" "I am, and I'm not hungry yet, but thanks," Doreen reassured her. "Just let me know when you are ready for a sandwich. I have some wonderful ham and homemade sourdough bread." Doreen nodded, her smile grim. "I'm sorry about your friend. It's difficult when you are on the outs. And you know all about that too, don't you?" Nan said. "I'm so sorry your friends walked away from you when you left your husband." Just meant that they weren't friends, at least not mine, Doreen said with a smile. And that's really what I have to remember. Just because I wanted them to be friends and thought that's what they were, you don't really understand what a friend is until you hit the rocks and need somebody to be there for you. And that's just called life. She shrugged. I wouldn't give up what I currently have for anything in the world. She gently stroked the back of Nan's hand. I'm so sorry I missed all those years with you. Not to worry, Nan said. Just think about how good everything is now for us. Sometimes you have to wait for what you can really appreciate. If I can have all my remaining years with you close by, I'll be absolutely in heaven. Doreen chuckled. On that note, let me tell you what I found underneath the big bed. She reached into her pocket, pulled out and unfolded the photocopy of the letter. She handed it to Nan. When Nan read it, tears came to her eyes. Doreen immediately regretted bringing it to her, but Nan smiled through her tears. I'd forgotten this was there, she said. A few times in your life you will find real turning points, and with the death of my Nan, my life definitely changed too. Are you still okay if I sell that bed though? Doreen asked. I'm afraid you'll hate me for it. Of course I don't mind, Nan said, lifting her head from the letter. I know the house is full of things, but honestly, things are not what I care about. And the older I get, the more I realize it. For a long time, I valued my independence. Now I value family, and that's you. The bed has a lifetime of memories for me, but it only represents them. It isn't the memory itself. And when you sell the bed and move it out of there, it doesn't take the memories with it. Doreen was delighted to hear that. Well, I did separate the mattresses from the frame today. I'm waiting for a phone call as to when they'll pack up everything. I found some paperwork in a folder thing in the bottom dresser drawer. Nan frowned, then poured their tea into the 2 cups. I think that's all of the paperwork, she said, puzzled. You didn't find anything about the pieces? No. Oh wait, we did find something. She pulled out the 2 foil-wrapped chocolates and held out her palm. Do you remember these? We found them in the secret drawers. Nan's face lit up with joy. Oh my, she whispered, staring at the chocolates. I remember those. My Nan used to hide them all the time for me to find. She looked up at Doreen. I'm so delighted you brought these. Such wonderful memories are stored in that furniture. Guilt seared through Doreen. And it must have shown on her face as Nan reached a thin arm across the table and squeezed Doreen's wrist. And no, that doesn't mean you shouldn't sell it. Those are my memories, not yours, she said in such a firm voice that Doreen relaxed. If I hadn't found that letter, Doreen said quietly, there wouldn't be any proof of how long we've had it. She then brought out the locket and cuffs. We found these too. Oh my, Nan held it carefully, then clicked it open. A warm smile blossomed on her face. Lovely to find this again. It is indeed. Doreen accepted it from her grandmother and pocketed it. I still haven't found the paperwork on the antiques though. Nan tapped her fingers on the table. I'm pretty sure more paperwork is somewhere. As you clear out the place, you'll find more and more pieces. Doreen frowned. Are you talking about the antiques, or the paperwork? Nan blinked. Both. I know you inherited the bedroom suite, but did you invest in all the other pieces with your money? Doreen asked, half in delight and half in outrage. Why would you do that? She was generally curious because, if things didn't matter to Nan, why bother putting money into valuable antiques? It's not that the things mattered, she said. It was the history of a piece that mattered. Once I realized who might have been the previous owners and why they had it, that's what I was fascinated by. But it was at the time when I was lonely. And what are you supposed to do when you're lonely? Well, you find things to fill your time with. You find things to be happy with. I was always very taken by everybody else's stories. And that's what antiques are. They are wood that has absorbed the stories of all the people who have owned them. So you'll find an eclectic mix of pieces in the house. And no, I don't mind if you sell all of them. I worry you don't have enough money, Doreen said quietly. It would bother me to think you had invested all your money in all these things. Then I sell them, and I get the money, and yet you're suffering. Nan's gaze opened wide. She patted her granddaughter's hand. You really are a sweetheart, but I am not suffering, she said firmly. I have lots of money in my accounts. I'm hoping you'll do something with the antiques so you have some income, and so you won't be starving. And speaking of starving, Doreen said, straightening in the chair, I made omelets the other day. Nan clapped her hands together and chuckled. Wow. I am so happy to hear that. Is that what you and Mac were eating? Doreen frowned at her. As a matter of fact, it was, but I don't want you to make too much out of it. Not at all, Nan said. And if Mac is teaching you how to cook, then I am doubly delighted. If I was still there, I'd be helping you myself. She leaned forward and in a loaded whisper said, but this gives Mac a really good reason to stop by all the time, doesn't it? I don't think he needs any reason right now, Doreen admitted. We have so much going on in our lives that keep intersecting. I don't think it's much or an issue. I'm glad you came over today, Nan said. You've really put a sparkle back into my mood. Doreen chuckled. Ditto. I do love that it's just a short walk to visit you. She lifted her teacup, took a sip, and when she put it down she said, Do you have any of your favorite recipes written down? Nan nodded. They're still at the house. I don't do much cooking now. If I do, it's nothing I don't already know by heart. That would be lovely, Doreen said. I can't wait until I can do things without recipes. You do lots of things, Nan said. What you did for Paul's family was tremendous. Not to mention for the poor handyman who was accused of stealing that poor little boy. I guess everybody is talking about that now too, aren't they? Doreen asked. Of course they are, Nan said. Just think about it. Look at how much you've done for the families. Doreen nodded. Much less so for the Family Planning Center, though. That Cecily was a problem to begin with, Nan said. I warned my neighbors about her a long time ago. She was just trouble. Very strict, very opinionated, that woman, Nan said with an admonishing finger. I'm sorry the other two were killed, but I really could see her life ending in a bad way. Well, she'll be in jail for a long time, Doreen said. So tell me more. I need all the details on how you found Paul and the handyman. Don't leave anything out. The residents here are immensely curious. Nan smiled and waited. Doreen sighed. She couldn't talk Nan out of this. For all Doreen knew, Nan was acting as bookie for many related bets among the old folks here on this particular cold case. Sighing again, Doreen began her tale. Nan had many questions. Doreen figured each one had to do with Nan's particular gambling matters. Shaking her head, Doreen answered each one. An hour later, Doreen was hungry. You know what? That ham sandwich sounds pretty good right now. I'll make one, unless you want to share one with me? Nan shook her head, jumping up. I've got this. You sit here and rest. Nan returned shortly with a sandwich and some baby carrots. So what are you working on now? Nan asked, easily sliding in that question. Doreen caught herself from telling her grandmother everything she knew, and settled on the basic truth. Just the case of Johnny Jordan, who went missing. I think it's fascinating that Penny contacted you. And I do love that you came here to talk to me about it. It's like we're co-conspirators or something, Nan said with a chuckle. Potentially we are, Doreen said, laughing. Because everybody here is such a huge source of information that it would be absolutely amazing if I could find out more stuff on what Johnny was like, what his friends were like. Just think about it. I mean, there's a whole world I can't access because I didn't live here back then, but those of you who did, that's massive. You all have huge memory banks I can't even imagine. That's true enough, Nan said. And we definitely have an awful lot of people here who would have been around back then. She pursed her lips as she thought. I'll have to talk to some people here. I know Penny's neighbor. I think her name is Ginger. She lived there at the same time Johnny went missing. She might remember something about it. It would help if it wasn't a family member, Doreen said, because family members always tend to remember the deceased with a kind eye but not necessarily an honest eye. Nobody wants to think of their family members as being anything other than delightful. But the truth is, as you and I both know, not everyone is always as delightful as the family members want to remember them. Nan chuckled. Well, Ginger is here and she wasn't family, so I'll talk to her. If I can pin her down, that is. She's gone lots. If you could, that would be awesome. I really have absolutely nothing to go on. A big strapping young man gets up one day and walks away. The end. Not necessarily, Nan said. We know his vehicle was involved in an accident not long after he went missing that killed 2 of his buddies. We always wondered if they'd had something to do with Johnny's disappearance. Plus, how did they end up with his vehicle? I'll ask Penny about that, Doreen said. I plan to walk around her property to get an idea on the last known location for Johnny and where his dagger was found. If you walk home on the other side of the creek, Nan said, you'll get there in half the time. It's probably only a 10 or 15-minute walk. She glanced at her watch. You could probably walk by her place after our tea. Doreen loved that idea. She finished her tea and the last baby carrot and said, in that case, maybe I'll go now. Giving Nan a big hug and leaving her the copy of the letter, she turned and headed back out with the animals. She stopped for a moment to orient herself, and using the stepping stones, though of course one was missing, skipped across to the sidewalk, went down and around, then behind the old folks' home. She could cross the creek on this side and walk over and probably hit Penny's within a few minutes. At least according to Nan. As Doreen rounded the corner, Muggs sniffed all over the grass, as if it was a common walkway for dogs. She was forced to tug him forward quite a bit, because the last thing she wanted was the gardener to think that Muggs would pee on his perfect grass. She couldn't even imagine if Muggs left a turd somewhere close by. The gardener would probably have a heart attack. Smirking, she led her menagerie toward the sidewalk.